Welcome to another episode of Red and Black, where your conservatism is not just the color that you're used to. I'm Lenny McAllister, and I'm going to bring in some friends that are going to debate the new axiom that is not cutting off your nose to spite your face, but it's more like cutting off your ears to cut off your tourism face, or something like that, because at least two of these folks live in the sunshine state of Florida, and one of them at least knows where Florida is, so I guess that counts good enough. Priscilla, since you're the person that had the audacity to live in a place where it can snow in June, what say you about the springtime and what's going on in Florida? And I'm not going to get into the topic yet. I'm just trying to find a witty way to go from snow to sunshine and taxes and DeSantis. So,
well, they're talking about audacity when we're talking about a governor in my state and the governor of Florida, and a governor in my state wanting to invite Disney to come. Like, who would come to Denver for a Disney vacation? And
that was pretty cute.
$4,000 for a family of four. Like, just stop and read the bill. All I can say to people is, read the bill before.
You're jumping in front of the gun.
Okay, sorry. I'm hot topic.
Bill's ready to go. He's like, "Hey, let's jump.
Let's do it."
Yeah. You do realize that you're not doing anything for the tourism for the state of Colorado by bashing your own governor. But I'm going to put that's fine. Jeff, are you still living in Florida? Because I know you've been like all over the place over the southern part of the United States. I don't know where you live right now. Is it still Florida?
Yeah, DeSantis is still my new governor.
Okay. So cutting off your ears to spite your tourism face. Can you at least give me a C rating for that opening? A C at least, a C? Beautiful.
Yeah, I'll go with a C. That's fine.
That's all I wanted to know. I'm not going to ask you any further questions because I'm sure you have lots of opinions on this. Dr. Metzler, you own half of Florida. So I just figured I'd come to you and ask you, is your family compound also its own local government?
Well, it actually is. And actually, we're very, very happy that, in fact, we were not beaten up by Mike Tyson on a plane. And so we're fine. We have our own tax district. And so we're good. The family compound in Lake City, Florida is alive and well in its own tax district.
Well, you better not ever say anything about what the Florida government passes as far as policy goes. Do not criticize them, because
I will not. Because he may come from my tax district.
Yep.
It's exactly right. And actually, let's get back to that for just a second. Let's talk about another place in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. And let's talk about less two ears, and let's go to being two-faced. And particularly, I'm talking about McCarthy and McConnell, which sounds like the beginning of a joke of two guys with Irish-sounding last names walked into a bar, and the bar's name was Donald Trump. And I want to get into this because we all know the lake that just came out and the comments from the book from January 6th. And it's less about the fact that Republicans would be frustrated with Donald Trump and his lack of initial activity or involvement in what happened on January 6th. I want to start with this first. And Dr. Metzler, I'm going to go to you. The problem that people have with the Republicans, and this actually makes the case for Donald Trump in 2016 and in 2020 and possibly 2024, which is this. People of the swamp, people that have been there for the longest time, are loyal to nothing other than trying to find a way to get elected in the next election. The same Republicans that were all about Donald Trump, well, first of all, they hated Donald Trump until they loved Donald Trump, until they were sick of Donald Trump, until they loved Donald Trump, and that's our president that we got to get elected, and then they hated Donald Trump on January 6th, only to apologize to Donald Trump later. And that's the epitome of what makes people frustrated with the status quo of conservatism prior to Trump, and why Donald Trump has so many followers in the Republican Party since the era of Trump began.
Well, look, first of all, I think we need to stop talking about the current Republican Party as conservative. The current Republican Party, for the majority, is a populist party. Let's call it what it is. It is populism. And as it relates to McCarthy in particular, McCarthy has already, and I know this because I know it to be a fact, has already spoken with President Trump and basically groveled, as he usually does. The president has said, I'm glad that you changed your mind. And the question for McCarthy is this: how big is the win going to be? Here's the thing. He is not currently in peril by the large part of the party. And again, I know this because I know it to be a fact. He's not in peril. However, if there is a slim majority, he will be in peril. The president is so far taking the position, I'm glad you have come around from saying the things about the 25th Amendment, etc. But before we get to that, I have to question, why would you be on a call, Kev, with Liz talking about the 25th Amendment and all of those kinds of things? Look at how skillfully she brought up. So, Kevin, as it relates to the 25th Amendment discussion, where are we on that? Now, of course, her office has denied that she leaked the tape. Okay, they've made a denial. But Kev, there's a question of judgment and leadership here. I think that's the more important question.
Well, and Priscilla, let's go to this because, I mean, you're obviously a Republican leader as part of the apparatus out there in Colorado. You know, the apparatus not that long ago was very anti-Trump, and then it became obviously the party of the incumbent president between 2017 and 2021. But it's always this back and forth love and hate between whether they want to be behind the guy or they don't. It seems like it's very convenient when they want to bash Trump to do so. And this tape is just another example of that. And whether Kevin McCarthy was trying to be on the right side of history or not, and kind of trying to acquiesce or placate Liz Cheney or not, it makes him look horrible. And to me, perhaps this makes it even less likely that he's going to be speaker, even if it's quote unquote not in jeopardy as far as the numbers are right now.
Wow, there's so much to unpack here. I think McCarthy's going to be just fine. I think this is such a high level argument that's happening that doesn't really touch the average Republican. And, you know, people are talking about the issues of the day. They're really sick and tired of all the things that are being destroyed in America and how things are falling apart. We're talking about issues of inflation and security and the border and safety and education. And when every day people don't see solutions happening, they're going to go to the strongest voice. And right now that happens to be Donald Trump. Whether he's a populist or a Democrat or a Republican, he's saying all the right things, and he's proven that he's going to stand up for America first. And that's what people are responding to. We have a lot of great Republicans in office who are strong, but Donald Trump just seems to have this magnetism about him. And yes, he's a populist, and he's saying the things that people are saying every day, but they just don't have the microphone. Now, I find it really hard to believe that there were two people on this phone call and it got leaked and no one's claiming responsibility. Like, I'm insulted by that. I have a belief that it was.
Wait, you're insulted by this? Have you never met a politician before, Priscilla? You claim you're in politics. You've never met a politician?
I'm triggered and offended. And so I want the truth, and I can handle the truth. Who leaked that? Who leaked that recording? Who recorded it and who leaked it? There's only one person that the are all pointing to the same person.
Daquan leaked it.
Yeah, exactly. It was TMZ, Priscilla. It was TMZ. The same people that gave you the JetBlue Mike Tyson video are the people that leaked the audio. You're never going to find that out because this is midterm politics, and there are people trying to save their congressional and senatorial seats, in addition to people trying to run for speaker and possibly run for president. But nice try. Jeff, what say you?
You know, this might not sound popular, but I ain't mad at Kevin McCarthy. I'm not mad at him at all. The dude's a politician, and he, if what I think happened, then he played this smoothly. Because remember, he was telling Liz Cheney, oh, I'm going to go and say that maybe Trump should resign. McCarthy knows that Trump wasn't going to resign. He knew better than to bring that to him. There was absolutely no way he was going to ask Trump to resign. He's not a stupid person. I know that this makes him look, like he is indecisive. No, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to placate the anti-Trump crowd, and I believe he was probably frustrated with Trump too, because I think we all were on that day, maybe for different reasons. I was frustrated at him because he didn't handle it the right way. I don't believe he caused it. I don't blame him for it, but I think McCarthy is playing his cards right. He is an establishment figure, but he has realized that he's not going to get anything done. He's not going to achieve his political ambitions if he's not willing to work with Trump and the base. That's what he's been doing this whole time. So I don't think this is a big story because it gives you kind of an insight to what was going on in the aftermath of the riot. But really, I mean, this is a water is wet type of thing. Kevin McCarthy is a politician. Liz Cheney went full anti-Trump. The reason she lost her leadership position isn't because she didn't like Trump. It's because she was obsessed with not liking Trump. So McCarthy was able to give him some criticism.
Wait a minute. Hold on. I mean, if anything, it seems as though at least Liz Cheney has kept to a certain set of principles. Maybe she doesn't like Trump because of certain principles she doesn't like, which
those neocon principles, yeah, probably.
And if that's the case, if she doesn't like Trump because of the principles, so be it. It's less about being obsessed with being anti-Trump. Now, there are some people that have been anti-Trump, and then you go look at their policies, like, wait a minute, that kind of lines up with Trump. I mean, there are some people on the left that are very American protectionism when it comes to policies, which is very much what Trump was like economically, that you're like, okay, that's not conservative. That's actually more towards the left, and that's where Trump lines up. Why are you up against the president on that? But I don't think Liz Cheney falls into that. I think Liz Cheney is always trying to talk about a certain set of principles, even if you don't like how she's done it or how long she's done it.
The problem with Liz Cheney is, again, what I was saying, she made her whole platform about Orange Man bad, especially after January 6th, to the point to where she couldn't even be effective. And I understand, because if all you want to talk about is Trump, if I go up to you, Liz Cheney, and said, hey, how's it doing? It's raining crazy weather, right? Yeah, but Trump is a real danger to our democracy. That's the type of person she was. Her and Adam Kinzinger. If you notice, the other reps that voted for his impeachment, they're not in as much danger because after everything happened, they kept moving on with their lives. Liz Cheney did not, and neither did Adam Kinzinger. But now I'm digressing. I'm trying to talk about Kevin McCarthy here. I think that he was playing the game. He played it well. I think that he'll be fine. He is going to be the House Speaker because what Dr. Metz was talking about with that conversation, the New York Times published something on that. And yeah, this is true. Trump did basically forgive him, and he said, at least you didn't go through with trying to get me to resign. That's a quote that I read. Again, that was smart, but his future is in Trump's hands right now. And Trump, I think, is going to give him the thumbs up, even though he knows the base still gives him the side eye because they didn't trust McCarthy before. But if Trump gives him his blessing, they'll still give him the side eye, but they'll tolerate him. And if McCarthy is going to do what he says he's going to do when he gets in that position, I ain't got a problem with it.
But the only danger for McCarthy at this point is what other tapes are going to drop. That's the cautionary tale, because we know there are other tapes. We don't know what's in those other tapes. So that's the cautionary tale. I think, in fact, you're right. Trump said, okay, we're good. However, we know how unpredictable Trump is. If these tapes come out, and, he says some other stuff, then, so I think that's the cautionary tale. But from a political standpoint, I, in fact, think it was an excellent strategy. This is a good strategy from his standpoint.
Hold on. Was it a strategy? Because we're now taking the context of April and applying it to January. Those people were scared for their lives. There were people that were coming in there. If they'd have gotten their hands on some Congress people, they would have ripped them apart, or at least they would have tried to. So these are people we're giving, and I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, I could be wrong, and I'm sure the three of you and people in the chat room are going to say, there you go again, Lenny, but that's fine. I digress. Go drink, because I'm sure I drive you all to drink. But we're putting a context of the end of April in 2022 to people that were scared out of their minds January 6th, 2021, not just for democracy, not just for the election, For their physical safety, we had Congress people hiding under chairs crying. So Kevin McCarthy, I don't think, was thinking about strategy and trying to play Liz Cheney after there was a certain segment of the U.S. House of Representatives that had to go change their underwear in the middle of that day.
Yeah, but
really quick. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, but you don't know.
Really quick. I would understand that, but remember, this is the aftermath, so everything had calmed down by this time. I know tensions were still running high, people were still angry, but when I listened to that audio, I'm not listening to a man who actually plans to do what he says he's going to do. I'm listening to a guy who you can tell by his tone that he doesn't think that telling Trump to resign is a good idea. I mean, you could just tell by what he's saying.
Or he didn't, or Jeff, he knew in his heart of hearts, he's never going to get on the phone and tell Donald Trump to resign because he's been wavering in the wind. Kevin McCarthy's never been known as a principled politician. People tease John Boehner for crying all the time, but they at least thought that he stood for what he really believed in. They thought that Paul Ryan stood for what he believed in. He might have been an egghead and could not have any empathy for everyday people, but he at least was genuine to who he was. Nobody says that about Kevin McCarthy. So I don't know about that.
Yeah, but except if you think that at his core, Kevin McCarthy is not a political animal and a political survivalist, then I think you're sadly mistaken. Look, at the end of the day, to your point about principles, we don't need no stinking principles. We need to win elections. We need to win control. So I think if you're thinking, oh, well, was it a strategy? It was. He is at base a political animal fighting for survival. His only aim is to be Speaker of the House at any cost. So I think we have to give him at least that much credit.
This is like some Frank Underwood stuff from House of Cards.
Yes.
That's what he was doing. That's
precisely
what he was doing.
Priscilla, real quick before we get to Mickey Mouse, House of Mouse, and all that other jazz.
Oh, yeah, I agree 100%. It's fascinating to watch while there are primaries happening and who's endorsing who and who's not endorsing who and who's responding to that and who's jockeying for Speaker of the House. This is all a political strategy that's taking place that we're observing. And we've got the fresh popcorn, cheddar flavored, watching all of this go down. McCarthy's going to be just fine. I think that he's got all of his support lined up, and it's just a matter of time.
Interesting that you would say that. Let's go to something else a little different. And I'm going to bring up the image because this all goes back to what you're not allowed to say, right? So there's the bill that says don't say these words. And because Disney got itself involved in this whole controversy, now it's going to lose a very specific tax status that allowed it to even be created where it was in Florida, much less thrive. And now there's rumors that it's going to end up impacting taxpayers in Florida, the tourism base and the like. But this seems to be all about the culture wars we've been going through over the last 2 decades or so running amok. And I'm going to go to you, Jeff, first, because you are a new Floridian with a new governor, but same old conservatism in regards to what you believe. When you see how this is playing out as far as going from pushback and culture wars to policy in the making, how have you been looking at this?
Yeah, there's a lot to this, so I'll try not to filibuster. I mean, first off, when Disney and DeSantis started going at it, I was on DeSantis' side. I'm still on his side, honestly, as far as on the argument over the parental rights and education bill. Disney reluctantly got into this, and that's what people aren't remembering. They weren't trying to be involved with this whole debate, but they made the mistake of listening to a very small but very loud fringe who wanted to push them into it. So, they're kind of bringing the stuff on themselves. Now, the debate that's happening on the right, especially on social media, is whether it was appropriate I shouldn't just say DeSantis, because it's not just DeSantis, it's Florida's legislature as well. They are repealing their tax exempt status, their special status, as punishment for coming out against the Don't Say Gay bill. And no, there is no other reason why they're doing it. They never talked about doing it before. They're only doing this because Disney used its speech in a way that they didn't like. And so a lot of people are saying, yeah, because we got to play by the left's rules. We got to do what they're doing, or this is how the left would handle it. But on the other side, people like myself are saying, you better be careful with this. You better be very careful. I mean, this better be where it stops, because if you start getting in love with the state and you get that taste of the power that comes with using the government to punish a private corporation or a publicly traded, but a private organization, just because you didn't like what they said and you don't like their programming and you don't like the agenda that came out of the videos that were leaked, this can lead to a very dark place, because now you're giving Democrats even more permission to do it. And you're also giving people on the right more permission to do it, people who you may not like. What if the establishment does this to a state and you don't agree with what they're doing? It's a concerning place to be. And I hope that we don't start falling down this rabbit hole. I'm hoping that the slippery slope doesn't happen. Dr.
Metz, I'm going to go to you next, primarily because you can look at this from a legal standpoint, a policy standpoint, and obviously as somebody that's been in Florida, has connections to Florida for quite some time. That well-roundedness I want to hear from. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think Jeff's 100% right on this. Listen, if in fact they wanted to do this before, they should have done it. Now, there are a number of ramifications here. Let's remember, DeSantis won by 60,000 or so votes last time. Disney has 70,000 employees. Let's look at that, number one. Number two, as it relates to this, is the Republican Party becoming the party now of government intervention and higher taxes? I think that's a question we need to ask, because here's the thing. So now these counties where Disney is are now going to be responsible for those taxes that Disney was paying for firefighters, etc. Okay, so does that mean a tax increase? We need to look at that. Remember that in the production and building of Disney, there were a number of municipal bonds that were brought in place. Now that Disney does not have this special tax status, do they have to continue to pay those bonds, or does it revert to the taxpayers? Listen, I think DeSantis is right relative to that. However, the reasons concern me greatly. And again, we have to ask ourselves, are we conservatives? Are we, something else? Are we populists? What are we? And at the end of the day, I think post-election, this whole Disney special tax status will be renegotiated in a different way. Let's be clear.
First of all, if DeSantis wins, there's no need to do it. If DeSantis loses, you can renegotiate. But what purpose?
But loses to who? Loses to Nikki Fried? I
understand that. But to your point, though, he only won by 60,000 votes, and he lost primarily because Andrew Gillum lost the race. He ended up bad policies, and then we saw where his mindset was soon after that race. If you look at people more often than not, and Priscilla, I'm going to pivot to you on this, we know that more often than not, people don't vote for a candidate. There are times people win elections because people vote against somebody else. Did people really think that Joe Biden won 2020 because Joe Biden inspired people? Hell, one could make the argument that Donald Trump didn't inspire a whole lot of people in the middle, the same people that just got done voting for Barack Obama, but they were not excited about Hillary Clinton. So there's something to be said about making this race more interesting. But Priscilla, I want to actually start with the question. Dr. Metzer seemed to have answered what he just proposed, which is, are we still conservatives or are we something else? He said we're populist, and this is a populist move. I don't like what you're doing. I'm going to be a culture warrior, and I'm going to use politics and policy to push my cultural warriorism, if you will. And that goes to Jeff's point. That's a very dangerous place to be if, as conservatives, we're trying to lead a better America through the muck that we've been in for the last 2 decades.
Well, something we need to mention here is the fundamental reason why we're even having this conversation to begin with, and that's children and parents. And we've already seen an election that was impacted by the left attacking parents, and parents waking up and saying the government is not going to have the first priority over the decisions that impact my family. We are in a culture war. The number one reason why we see disparities, not only in education, but in finances, is when you look at the statistics and the data about two-parent families. And it's one of the reasons that we have this work that we have to get done, especially in the Black community, because that seems to be the statistic around broken families and crime and suicide and low achievement. It's because the family and traditional values are being attacked. So I support Governor DeSantis in protecting parents' rights. That's what this is about. And the Democrats will not win by attacking parents and families. I just don't see it happening, because it's too important of an issue to say, oh, well, I'm going to look at the taxes, or I'm going to look at the freedom. This is not about freedom of speech. This is about mama bears and papa bears protecting their babies. And that's what's going to decide this election in November.
You actually bring up an interesting point, which is, voters actually put their foot down. It didn't have to come to government putting their foot down with a public policy, to Jeff's point and to Dr. Metzler's point. Youngkin won in 2021 because voters said, not so fast, McAuliffe. We're going to show you who's boss. And again, let's even go back to 2018, where Andrew Gillum, who should have won that gubernatorial election based on registrations alone, ended up saying, oh, and by the way, I'm going to cut back on the school choice in Florida. And Black parents said, not so fast, my friend. And that's how DeSantis snuck over the finish line. And I don't mean sneak like he stole it, but like he was able to have enough oomph to barely get over the finish line in a very hotly contested race to win that race in 2018. So it begs the question, did they need to take this extra step with a law when the voters were already taking care of this in recent electoral history, and they didn't have to quite take this step and possibly jeopardize November 2022?
Well, when you say jeopardize, are you talking about jeopardizing the governor's race? What do you mean?
Let's say even if DeSantis wins, but there are other key races nationally that use this issue to fundraise. Look, we have a senatorial race in Pennsylvania, where we have a gubernatorial race in Pennsylvania where Trump said, well, I know who I wouldn't endorse and who I'm not going to vote for. So these are issues. And just on the flip side of that, Democrats could use this issue and make it an issue that drives some people across the finish line to win hotly contested races there as well. This is something that could backfire, not just necessarily in a Florida gubernatorial race, but nationally.
Well, the potential that it could backfire is always there. But let's go to Virginia. Youngkin won in Virginia for a number of reasons. Number one, Terry McAuliffe made an asswipe out of himself. Number one, with the whole trying to tie Trump around. Dude, really? Number two, Youngkin was very clear. Trump, stay out of Virginia. He was very clear about that. I don't think that unless Republicans are very smart and strategic about how they do this, that they continue to win. So even, frankly, there is no way a Democrat is going to win the Florida gubernatorial race. You got two choices. You got Nikki and you have Charlie Crist. How many times has Charlie lost? It's just not going to happen in the state of Florida. But I do think once DeSantis wins, there is going to be some negotiation on this Disney thing. Because at the end of the day, Disney is not going to pack up and move out of Florida. That ain't going to happen, number one. Number two, I think it's going to be the question, though, of how much money is Disney going to contribute to Republicans running for office in Florida? The answer is going to be nothing.
I seriously can't wait to see what all these people cheering on DeSantis are going to say when he renegotiates his stuff with Disney. I can't wait.
Exactly.
Because I'm going to be on Twitter like, renegotiated. Before? He's renegotiating. Right. What do you guys have to say now?
And we're forgetting about number three. Florida's going to remain a swing state in 2024. And And if and when DeSantis wins in 2022, unless if Trump jumps into the race, and even if it's Trump, some Republican nominee is going to need to win Florida and can't have this end up being the reason why it's closer than it should be.
No, Florida is no longer a swing state. Mark my words. It's not. Meaning
Okay.
that in the state of Florida, there is no Democratic power in the state of Florida. It's just not. It no longer exists. Unless the only exception would be if Val Demings unseats Rubio, then we have a different ballgame. But as it currently exists, Florida is no longer a swing state. Florida is a red state.
Florida is going to have a whole bucket load of money dropped into it in 2024. We all are basically saying it's not going to be Joe Biden running in 2024. If you get a halfway decent Democrat or a Republican gaffe that puts a Republican candidate's foot in one's mouth.
Well, who would that halfway decent Democrat be?
That's a good question, and I'm not
the
saying
bench is weak. The bench is weak.
That's very
You
true.
know, I actually see what Dr.
But it
Metz
was
is
weak in
saying.
2020 as well. It was weak in 2020
No, but
as
it's
well.
weak.
But
now.
I would say for 2024 at least, Florida is a red state. Now it could
Yes.
go back to being a swing state in 2028. I think that's very possible. But
Not
right now,
24.
this state is a red state. And even though before I started living here, I was here last year 4 or 5 times. And like when I'm talking to people, like one, they like DeSantis. Even if they disagree with his motivations on this, he's still pretty popular. I don't think that this issue will become big enough to really have a really profound negative impact on Republicans in Florida or even nationwide.
Like I said, the only thing that changes this equation is if Val Demings unseats Rubio. That's
That
it.
ain't happen.
And other than that, what do you have? Look at who you have. You have Nikki Fried and you have Charlie Crist, the so-called leaders. If those are leaders, you might as well have nobody. I mean, that's the reality of Florida.
I mean, I think that I don't know if a lot of people disagree with the motivation behind, because people see right through it. When you have Disney on the offensive and literally attacking the legislature over a bill that they are discombobulating in the public. I mean, they're allowing misinformation about this bill to be perpetuated. And instead of standing up for children and saying, you know what, it is reasonable to not talk about sex to 5-year-olds. Like, that's a reasonable thing. And when we have problems across America with confusion and social emotional issues, and like, I'm in the classroom every single day, I see what's happening. So I'm speaking firsthand that we have a lot of big issues that we need to address with our children. And it's absolutely inappropriate to be talking about sexual orientation to children. That's a parent's priority. Parents should be doing that. So Disney was wrong, in my opinion, for opposing the legislature. They should have said, you know what, this is appropriate. Like, let's wait until after 3rd grade and let's make sure that it's appropriate information and the delivery is appropriate for the age group. Like, it's insane that we're even having this conversation.
How about we go to this even? I mean, let's be clear. Even if Disney doesn't take a position and doesn't agree with the bill, how about just being the Disney that won't allow Mickey Mouse to have a voice on the grounds of Disney World as to not offend any culture? I mean, that's a standing policy at Disney World where Mickey is not allowed to talk, so that when a little Japanese kid comes up, Mickey's not speaking in English. Or when a little Russian kid comes up, Mickey's not speaking in Japanese. If they're so afraid of offending somebody where one of the most iconic cartoons in history, world history, is not allowed to speak, why speak up on a bill like this? And this kind of goes to, Jeff, the whole issue of people don't seem to know where their lane is anymore. Because if Disney's going to still walk around with Mickey not speaking, but they're going to jump into this culture war, it almost speaks to just how far gone we have gone, because there's no sensibility to half of this stuff anymore.
Yeah, they had the right idea at first. They stayed out of it. They weren't going to get involved with it. I miss the Disneyland where I can just, watch a Disney program and just be entertained. Just like people want to just go to an NFL game because they just want to be entertained. They just want to watch football. They don't want to be lectured to. I mean, even in the stuff that I watch now, I mean, if they have maybe like a little bit of wokeness or they have some type of message, okay, fine. But you better not lecture me while I'm trying to watch you shoot out fights with the Jedi Master. I don't want to be lectured to. Just give me the fights, give me the Star Wars, give me my superheroes, and that's it. But for some reason, they are caving into this stuff. And I'm not even sure that the leadership of Disney are all true believers in this stuff. It's like they're afraid of a small but fringe minority. Even Democrats were on board with the parental rights in education bill. Disney placed themselves against what most Americans wanted. And I really don't understand the wisdom of that. And we're seeing a lot of corporations doing that. It's going to take them getting punished enough to where their bottom line is being hurt. And that's when they'll change. It's not going to be because they got their special status changed by the government. The government's not going to change their minds. What the government did was something to make us feel good. I mean, that's not going to do anything. And I do think it was the right thing to do. I mean, I don't think that they should have like all that special stuff going on. But at the same time, the motivation behind it was to make us feel good and to position certain people for higher office. And I get it. That's politics. That's the way it works. But it's going to be when they lose money. When they're not as relevant, that's when it's going to hurt. And with Disney, it's going to be hard because they're so established, and people are going to give up their Star Wars. I'm waiting for Kenobi to come out next month. So
but their branding is impacted, right? Like what they've done is they've damaged the brand. It's tainted. People don't want to be a part of that anymore.
Right.
Yeah, and honestly, what I think is going to happen, I mean, because that video did come out that Christopher Rufo shared, where they're talking about, we're going to push this not so secret gay agenda. Or whatever agenda, because there was something involved with it too. I think that they're going to pump the brakes on that a little bit. I'm not saying they're going to give it up. They're not going to give it up. But I can see them saying, okay, maybe we need to slow down with some of this stuff because people don't want it. They just want the content. They want the magic. They want the escapism. They want something that their kids can watch and be entertained without being brainwashed. So I wouldn't be surprised if going forward, maybe we'll still see some of it. But I don't think that they're going to go full bore with it like that lady was saying in that video. Because frankly, they would be morons to do that because they will go out of business. Not tomorrow. It may be 10, 20 years down the road, but it is going to hurt their brand.
Dr. Metzler, part of the reason why we're seeing more and more people jumping into these type of cultural situations is kind of based on what we saw in Rochester, New York this past week in regards to the 8-year-old boy that was quasi-arrested. It's probably the best way of putting it, for stealing a bag of chips. Now, of course, people saw the video and were like, why are they putting this 8-year-old in the back of a police car? And they responded to that. But when you look at the story and you get into the story, it's kind of like everything else that we're seeing in America these days, where there's a lot to it. Number one, the police were familiar with this boy. Number two, they've been trying to scare this boy straight, along with working with the boy's parents for quite some time. Number three, maybe this is what cops would have done 30 years ago, particularly with community policing. I'm going to scare this kid straight so he stops stealing potato chips before it becomes something else. But yet, with so many things about race and culture hitting the media and everybody having a cell phone these days and everybody having an opinion these days, you find corporations jumping more and more into these type of things. So I want to kind of segue away from Disney. We can talk more about the corporate stuff, but I also want to talk about this video, this instance, and the more you learn about it, the more it's not black or white, no pun intended, but it goes right back to being in shades of gray with what transpired in upstate New York this week.
Well, yeah, it's definitely an issue of shades of gray. Look, I got to tell you, one of my younger brothers, part of the way we grew up, he was one of those kids who would always get in trouble relative to being a smartass with the police. And part of what they did was arrested him, and he and his friends brought them to the station. Call my dad. My dad goes down there and says, okay, you're going to spend the night in jail because you refuse to cooperate and do what you need to do. It was, in fact, the issue of community policing, and how, in fact, it worked because they knew him. But it's the same police department who would, when my mom was picking my other brother up from working at Wendy's, and he would get off at 10 o'clock at night, would sit with my mom at Wendy's until he got off to make sure he was safe. So there are, in fact, shades of gray. The question of policing, the question of, in some cases, these kids have to be taught a lesson. And in fact, if the parents aren't doing it, they need to work in concert with the police. It's a complicated process, yes. I don't think, though, we should always jump to the conclusion they did this because he's Black. I'm not sure. What does that get us? What does that get us to always say that, in fact, this is specifically because of the issue of race?
Priscilla, this is a tough one, right? Because this is an 8-year-old who's crying his tail off going into the back of a police car. That's horrible optics. When you read the story and you realize, oh, these cops were just over this kid's house talking to his parent, his dad again, and was telling him, look, this is basically what they've been doing an awful lot at 8 years old. You need to do some tough love. What can we do? And when the dad comes out and says he was never handcuffed, they were never arrested, and the dad's saying this in the media, Priscilla, where do you go? Because community policing, to Dr. Metzler's point, is also about, hey, I know little Joey, and little Joey is a good kid, but he needs to stop having sticky fingers. How do I scare little Joey straight? Remember the documentaries where they would take kids into jail 25 years ago?
Yeah.
And the lifer would scare the hell out of the kids, and they would sit there and cry, and then they'd start saying, I'm going to do better in school because. If this is what this was, then is it really as bad as what some people made it out to be, ma'am?
No, it wasn't. And we need to start changing the narrative because every case should be judged on its own merit, where you have a situation where the police in that community actually cares for this young boy and the family and has been over to the parents' homes several times because this young boy has repeatedly, and his siblings, stolen from the neighborhood store. And in this case, dad was home taking care of sick mom, tired, resting, needed a break. And the boy left home. And these are the real life situations that we see in our communities. But we need to make sure that we encourage positive relationships with our police officers, because these police officers clearly cared about this little boy. They didn't handcuff him. They weren't arresting him. They were taking him home where he needed to go. They did exactly what they needed to do. And when you have the community creating a narrative that's untrue and perpetuating that creates all of this negativity towards the very people that we're supposed to be supporting and encouraging and training. And so that's my big concern, especially in our community where emotions are really raw. And every time you just see a little boy and an adult grabbing him like this is a troubled young man. And I'm concerned that if he doesn't change his ways, that his encounters with the police are going to become way more serious than what they were that we saw in the news recently.
And more to the point, Jeff, this kid is not a troubled young man. He's a troubled 8-year-old. So it's this blend of, okay, what should the police do? Somebody called the police, okay? Somebody called the police or somebody saw it, right? So there's this element of, 1, they were called. 2, it's a crime. 3, they're repeats. And 4, you're trying to get them on the right track. And apparently previous efforts did not work. Because, let's just be honest. Back in the day, you know what would happen. Somebody's belt, somebody's switch, somebody would be popping some kid on the back of the backside, and that would be that. But now people call the police over that. You can't even so much as give your kid a look without somebody pulling out a cell phone and saying, I can't believe they gave their kid a look because that kid actually attempted to stand up, steal a candy bar. So what do you do in this instance? But the flip side is, we don't even have tough love anymore, Jeff, more often than not. We either have we hate you or I don't really care what you did because we're going to coddle it and we're going to go from there. Restorative justice is going to take care of this. Well, an 8-year-old doesn't understand the concept of restorative justice. So what do you do to get them to stop doing stuff like that?
Yeah, this is so multifaceted. I mean, we have, one of the elements is the government, how the police officers acted. We have the kids' parents. We have the community. We have a different society. We have different societal standards right now, and we're seeing all that play out in that one video. I mean, with the officers, like with me, they're government officials, so I'm always going to scrutinize them first. In this instance, I think maybe they were a little rough. They were probably rough for an 8-year-old kid. At the same time, what were they supposed to do? Were they supposed to just let the kid continue to do what he's doing? If he was continually stealing, then yeah, eventually the authorities are going to do something about it. I don't want that kid ending up in juvie, but that is what's going to happen. The option isn't to just let it keep happening. And I think that's the problem here. Yeah. Now, I did read a little bit about it, and the father was saying, "Oh, the police mistreated my son," or whatever. And I'm like, dude, okay, maybe again they probably were a little bit more harsh than they should have been. At the same time, where are you? Where's the mother? Why is your kid getting involved in this stuff? When I was a kid, and we all know we all know the story. I would go in Lawndale in LA. I would go into the convenience store to get some candy. I'd have my white friends with me. I'd get followed around, all that stuff. It was really my white friends that were stealing, guys, not me. But I wouldn't steal. Why? It wasn't because of the police. It's because I knew what would happen when I got home. I knew exactly what was going to happen.
Right.
And I'm not into just corporal punishment for everything or harsh punishment for everything. But what's in certain cases, it might have made sense. Even if my mom didn't spank me, I was still going to be afraid. So it was a totally different paradigm back then. And to me, if this kid is constantly getting into trouble, something does need to be done. And maybe maybe the officers and the parents were in communication because maybe they're trying to get them on the right track. I've had friends and family who told me about how their parents actually took them to the police station, like what you were talking about, Dr. Metzler, just to scare their kids straight.
Right.
And there are ways to handle this, but I'm not sure that in this climate and in this coddling climate that we have right now, that we can do it. I mean, restorative justice, there are good elements to that. I've read up on it, how it's applied in schools and elsewhere. There are positive elements on that. I think there are ways to apply that in ways that are positive, but it can't be at the expense of consequences.
And it can't be done.
There are negative consequences when you do something bad.
It can't be done at 8 years old where there's not the logical understanding and processing of the lesson learned there with some of the things that you. So, I mean, look, there's that. There's a visceral reaction when you see police officers put their hands on black kids as if they're grown. Look, we've seen security officers slam 15-year-old girls like they're grown-ass men that just stole $1 million from a bank. Yes. So let's not act like that's not still sitting inside of us. Sure. So I get that. So I know that that's part of what's going on. I also know that even with repeat offenders, if the skin color is a little different, there may be a different approach. I get that as well. However, at the same time, these are the type of tricky situations when you start calling for community policing. They're not there to be psychologists, and they're not there to be parents. And especially when you're seeing the spike in violence around cities across the country. Look, we're seeing it here in Pittsburgh. We just had a recent tragedy where we had roughly 200 kids in an Airbnb, most of them underage. 2 of them got shot up and killed. They're more concerned about that. And 8 is not that far away from 15. Now, granted, it's twice the age, but in the grand scheme of things, they're still all young people. And the police have to focus on that as well. So these type of things, they're trying to eliminate as soon as possible, especially when you see that there are, some repeat elements to this. And you can see that, okay, this is something that can be eradicated pretty quickly, but needs to be done pretty fast. I'll say, as the father of a 9-year-old, when I saw the video, I had a visceral reaction. When I read the story, I'm like, okay, I think that community policing is trying to scare this kid straight, but the optics still look horrible. I mean, Priscilla, am I wrong?
No, you're right. It's that emotional reaction because we hate to see that happen. It's why, as a teacher, When I have a problem with a student who's continually misbehaving in class, I actually call the father first, because mothers, tend to be a little more protective and make a little more excuses. I think it's just our nature as moms,
I'm going to be canceled.
I know, but this is my observation. We tend to be a little more nurturing. We excuse a lot of things, where fathers tend to be a little more disciplinarian. That's my experience as a teacher. And so I think where we're looking at these men who are saying, who are police officers who actually do care about this child and want to scare him straight, I guess, and keep him out of the system. Something needs to happen, because we don't want him to turn out to be a statistic. So we need to figure out a way as a Black community to address these issues, because we can't ignore them. And I'm seeing really big issues in our public schools where students realize nothing's going to happen to them. So the behavior gets worse and worse and worse. And I'm concerned, because they're losing out in education, but they're also not setting themselves up for success once they become an adult. And that's a big issue.
And Dr. Metzler, this is more than just a Black community issue. This is an American issue. But let's talk about the other side of the coin real quick before we go, because we're running out of time. When you have a white police officer that's doing community policing, that is trying to ride the line and trying to scare a kid straight, where they've been called, they're going to have to do something. Now they got to do something, because if they let the crime go, then there's a complaint from the person that's calling, and it's their shop, and they're being victimized. At the same time, they're part of community policing, so they're supposed to do something that's supposed to be softer than just by the book. This is a theft. These potato chips are $1.50. This is considered a misdemeanor crime. This is where you're going to have to go to court. We're going to take you downtown. Your parents are going to have to come get you, and you're going to have to go through the system, and there's going to be a record of this. You don't want that police officer to get jaded, because if that police officer gets jaded, guess what they start doing? They say, screw it. I'm going to do it by the book. And if that means I take your little butt in at 10 years old, that's
what I do.
That's a problem too.
Nobody wants to see that, but time,
it is in fact, and I think we have to stop this notion of immediately running to the conclusion that they would not have done this to a white kid. We gotta stop that.
In rural Kentucky, they might have.
Maybe in rural Kentucky, but I do think for that white officer, to your point, we also need to make sure that is the motivation of that white officer in particular. There are only two choices: help, do it, get it done, or we vilify you. Those are the only two choices.
And that's where we as Americans, and I'm going to close with this, that's where we as Americans have to make sure that we're being very intentional with understanding the nuances and the complexities of each situation. We understand societal trends, but in America, you're still supposed to be judged as an individual, not by statistics, whether you're Black, white, young, old, rich, poor. And if we lose the essence of that, that's when this becomes a democracy. This was never supposed to be a democracy. It was a democratic republic where the minority and the majority have a certain right of self-determination and a certain protection therein. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, what we also have to keep in mind is not just like, subscribe, and share, which we didn't mention at the beginning of the show, but a new announcement before we get out of here, which is this, that starting next week, Red and Black will be featured on Red State and on the Red State YouTube channel. So we need all of our subscribers, those of you in the chat room, those of you following us, to follow the Red State YouTube channel. We will start broadcasting there exclusively next week. Date and time will be coming throughout the week. As of right now, it looks like we're going to stay on Saturdays. We'll probably shift a little earlier in the day, but stay tuned. We'll be letting you all know through social media when the premiere of Red and Black on the Red State channel is going to come starting next week, which will be April 30th. In the meanwhile, Jeff Charles, real quick, what you got going on with the Fresh Perspective and with your articles this week?
Ooh, still got more interviews coming up. I've been having some fire conversations, y'all. So definitely check me out at A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles on YouTube. Check out my articles on Red State. Check out my audio only podcast. Again, I'll be dropping another episode next week. I've got a lot of stuff going on. I'm talking to some awesome people, and I've got even more coming up. So stay tuned.
Dig it. Dr. Metzger, real quick, what you got going?
Just keeping up the red and black spirit, baby.
There you go. I know that you're trying to work something out with Jeff. I know you're working something out with Priscilla, which makes me feel extremely left out. But I won't talk about that. Priscilla.
Well, of course, you're always welcome. But you were the one last week who said, I'm past my prime, so he talking to y'all, not me. You said that, bro.
I did say that.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, bro.
That's well, you know what? Never mind, both of you. Priscilla, you're prettier anyway. What do you got going on this week?
This weekend, I'm co-hosting a conference for pastors and parents around education and children. And then Sunday, I'm attending and speaking at a pro-law enforcement day rally. So, yeah, big weekend.
I saw those. You're actually doing something with the Heritage Foundation and got some good people that are coming in as well, including my man, Terrace Todd. Peace to my man, Terrace Todd.
Yes.
To him, tell him I said hello. There's a few other people that are there that you're catching up to as well. Fantastic. Same with the appreciation for law enforcement out there. Good stuff. I'm boring. I have nothing to report. I reported my big news. I still win because Red State YouTube channel, they didn't announce it. Don't give these three credit. You know who said it. Anywho, with that said, listen, we always appreciate you following us. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, join the Red State YouTube channel, because that's where we're going to be starting next week with conversations like this, having fun times with the good people over there at Red State. In the meanwhile, thank you for all that you do. Send us some chat, send us some conversations, send us some messages, give us some suggestions for topics if you like. You'll know how to find us. We're going to mix this up a little bit. We're excited about the new launch next week. In the meanwhile, you all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We'll talk to you soon. TCNGB, take care and God bless. Peace.